The 10-year-old boy's wooden spoon clattered to the floor, his brown eyes wide with disbelief as the wild Mustang with a shattered front leg limped through their ranch gate during the howling thunderstorm. Hunter Redfeather froze mid-stride, his coffee mug suspended in air, watching his mute son Dakota take his first step forward in 8 months. It wasn't the horse that stopped time. It was the girl. She emerged from the driving rain like a ghost, her long black hair plastered against her face, moving toward the 1,000-pound animal with nothing but bare hands extended. The Mustang, wild and pain-crazed, should have trampled her. Instead, it dropped its massive head and went completely still. Dakota's grandmother Pearl gasped from the doorway, her weathered fingers clutching the frame as she remembered another girl, long ago, who spoke the old language to hurt creatures. The boy who hadn't uttered a word since watching his mother drown was now stepping off the porch, drawn by something ancient and impossible. "Sweet Jesus," Hunter whispered, his voice cracking. "Who is she, and what's she done to my son?" Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The rain had stopped, but the silence that followed felt heavier than the storm itself. Copper Mesa, Arizona territory stretched endlessly under a punishing sun, its red earth cracked like broken promises. This was 1885, and hope was as scarce as water in these parts. Hunter Redfeather stood 6 feet tall with calloused hands that told the story of a man fighting a losing battle. Irish by birth, Lakota by marriage, he'd found his place in this harsh land through love, a love now buried beneath a simple wooden cross on the hill behind their cabin. 8 months since the flash flood took Willow, 8 months since Dakota last spoke, 8 months since their world collapsed into devastating silence. The boy had been his mother's shadow, chattering endlessly about the animals, mimicking her gentle way with injured creatures. Willow could calm a spooked horse with a whisper, heal a broken wing with herbs and patience. She'd taught Dakota the old ways, the Cherokee songs her grandmother had passed down, the belief that all living things shared the same spirit. Now their son sat hollow-eyed and mute, a 10-year-old ghost haunting the place where laughter used to live. Their ranch, once thriving, now teetered on the edge of ruin. $3,000 owed to Territorial Bank, a fortune that might as well have been $3 million. 90 days to pay or lose everything Willow had loved. The drought had killed their cattle. The grief had killed their hope. And Hunter was drowning in debts deeper than the flood that claimed his wife. Dakota was half Lakota through his mother, half Irish through Hunter's stubborn love that had crossed every social boundary in 1875. In this corner of Arizona territory, that mixed heritage made him an outsider twice over. Too Indian for the whites, too white for some tribes. His silence only deepened the isolation. The girl who'd emerged from the storm was perhaps 16, with Cherokee features softened by something else. Scottish, maybe, in the set of her jaw. Her clothes were travel-worn, her boots held together with leather strips, but her hands moved with the confidence of someone who'd never met an animal she couldn't gentle. She called herself Sage Willowbrook, and she had nowhere else to go. Pearl Meadowlark, Willow's mother, had taken one look at the girl and declared the spirits had sent her. The old Lakota woman lived with them now, her weathered hands still strong enough to braid Dakota's hair each morning, her voice still carrying the ancient songs her grandson no longer heard. But as Hunter watched Dakota creep closer to where Sage tended the injured Mustang, he saw something flicker in his son's eyes, the first spark of life since the day the waters rose. 3 days had passed since Sage Willowbrook arrived with the storm, and the rhythm of the Redfeather Ranch had shifted in ways Hunter couldn't quite name. She moved through their morning routines like water finding its course, quiet, purposeful, never asking permission but somehow belonging. Dakota followed her everywhere, a silent shadow drawn to her gentle presence with animals. The crisis came at dawn on the fourth day, announced by Pearl's sharp cry from the chicken coop. Hunter rushed outside to find his prize rooster, Courage, lying motionless in a pool of blood and scattered feathers. The bird had been Dakota's favorite since Willow brought it home as a chick, a magnificent red-gold creature that crowed each morning like a herald of hope. "Coyote got into the coop," Pearl said grimly, holding up torn wire mesh. "Must have been desperate to come so close to the house." Hunter knelt beside the rooster, feeling for signs of life. Courage's breathing was shallow, labored. Deep gashes ran along his neck and wing, and one leg bent at an unnatural angle. The bird's bright eyes were glazed with pain and approaching death. "I'll get the rifle," Hunter said quietly, knowing what had to be done. A wounded animal's suffering shouldn't be prolonged, especially when there was no hope of recovery. "Wait." Sage's voice was barely above a whisper, but it stopped Hunter mid-step. She approached slowly, her movements careful and deliberate. "May I try something first?" Hunter hesitated. The rooster was clearly dying. Keeping it alive would only mean more pain. But Dakota had materialized beside them, his small hands clenched into fists, his eyes fixed on Courage with desperate intensity. For the first time in months, Hunter's son seemed truly present, truly caring about something beyond his own silent grief. 1 hour, Hunter conceded. If he's still suffering after that? Sage nodded and carefully lifted the injured bird. Courage didn't struggle, another bad sign. She carried him into the barn, Dakota trailing behind like a faithful dog. Hunter watched them disappear into the shadows, then turned back to mending the chicken coop, trying not to think about the conversation he'd soon need to have with his son about death and mercy. The hours stretched into afternoon. Hunter found himself checking the barn repeatedly, always finding the same scene. Sage sitting cross-legged in the hay with Courage cradled in her lap, Dakota perched nearby on an overturned bucket. She hummed as she worked, the same Cherokee lullabies Willow used to sing, while her hands moved gently over the bird's injuries. What she was doing couldn't be called medicine in any way Dr. Stone would recognize. She cleaned the wounds with water and herbs Pearl had gathered, spoke to the rooster in a mixture of Cherokee and English, and held him with a stillness that seemed to calm his labored breathing. But it was more than technique. There was something in the way she touched the bird, as if she could feel his pain as her own and share her strength in return. As evening fell, Hunter prepared himself for the difficult task ahead. Courage hadn't moved in hours, and Dakota would need to say goodbye. He entered the barn with heavy steps, ready to end the bird's suffering with quick mercy. Instead, he found Dakota sitting straighter than he had in months, his eyes bright with something Hunter had almost forgotten existed: hope. And there, in Sage's gentle hands, Courage lifted his head and managed a weak but unmistakable crow. "He's going to make it," Dakota whispered, and Hunter's world tilted on its axis. They were the first words his son had spoken since the day Willow died. Not a shout or a cry, but a quiet statement of faith delivered in a voice rusty from disuse but clear as morning water. Dakota reached out with one small finger to stroke Courage's feathers, and the rooster's eyes focused on him with recognition. "Mama used to sing to herd animals too," Dakota continued, his voice gaining strength. "She said pain gets lighter when someone shares it." Sage's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't make a show of Dakota's breakthrough. She simply nodded and said, "Your mama sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was," Dakota agreed, then looked directly at his father for the first time in months. "Papa, can Sage stay? I think Courage needs her. I think maybe I do too." Hunter felt his throat close around words he couldn't speak. His practical mind warned against false hope, against depending on strangers, against believing in things that couldn't be explained. But watching his son's face come alive again, seeing light return to eyes that had been dark for so long, he found himself nodding. "We'll see," he managed. "We'll see." That night, Dakota ate a full dinner for the first time since his mother's death and fell asleep without the nightmares that usually plagued his rest. Word of the rooster's miraculous recovery spread through Copper Mesa like wildfire in dry grass. In a territory where news traveled on horseback and through saloon gossip, extraordinary events became legend within days. By Sunday morning, half the congregation at the whitewashed church was whispering about the mysterious girl who could heal dying animals with nothing but her hands and ancient songs. Dr. Ezekiel Stone stood at his office window watching the red feather wagon roll down Main Street toward the general store. The girl sat beside Hunter, her dark hair braided simply, her posture straight but cautious. She knew she was being watched, judged, discussed in every doorway they passed. What troubled Dr. Stone wasn't her presence. It was the light he could see returning to young Dakota's face. At 55, Dr. Stone had dedicated his life to bringing modern medicine to the frontier. He'd studied at Harvard Medical College, served as an Army surgeon, and spent 15 years building his reputation as the most skilled physician in 3 territories. But 5 years ago, that reputation hadn't been enough to save his 17-year-old son, Jeremiah. The memory still burned like acid in his chest. Jeremiah, curious and headstrong, had been bitten by a rattlesnake while exploring the canyons. Instead of coming straight to his father, the boy had sought help from an old Apache medicine man who claimed he could draw out poison with herbs and ritual. By the time someone brought Jeremiah to Dr. Stone's office, the venom had progressed too far. Modern medicine, which might have saved him earlier, was powerless against the delay. Now, this girl appeared, practicing the same dangerous superstitions that had killed his son. Worse, she was influencing a vulnerable child who'd already suffered tremendous loss. Dr. Stone had seen what happened when people chose folklore over science. Graveyards were full of such choices. The confrontation came Tuesday afternoon when Martha Goldfield burst into his office, her face flushed with indignation. Martha was the banker's wife, a woman who'd appointed herself guardian of the town's moral standards since arriving from Boston 3 years earlier. "Doctor, you must do something about that Indian girl," she declared, settling her considerable bulk into the chair across from his desk. "She's filling people's heads with dangerous nonsense. Old Thomas Clearwater is talking about bringing his lame horse to her instead of having it put down properly." Dr. Stone set down his medical journal. "What exactly has she done that's dangerous?" "She's practicing medicine without a license. That rooster should have died. Everyone knows it. When animals recover from injuries that severe, it gives people false hope. Next thing you know, parents will be bringing sick children to her instead of to you." The words hit closer to home than Martha could have known. Dr. Stone's jaw tightened as he remembered his own son's misplaced faith in traditional healing. "Furthermore," Martha continued, "I've made inquiries about this Sage Willowbrook. No one knows where she came from, but there are stories. A family in New Mexico blamed her when their grandmother died after she tried to treat pneumonia with herbs. Another incident in Colorado, a mining accident where she supposedly healed a man who died 2 days later." Dr. Stone leaned forward. "Are you certain of these reports?" "I have it on good authority from my cousin who travels the territorial circuit. This girl is trouble, Doctor. She brings death wherever she goes, but people only remember the few times her primitive methods accidentally work." That evening, Dr. Stone called an emergency meeting of the town council. The 5-man board gathered in the back room of Haggerty's saloon, oil lamps casting long shadows across their weathered faces. Hunter Redfeather was not invited. "Gentlemen," Dr. Stone began, "we have a public health crisis developing in our community. An unlicensed practitioner is treating animals and potentially people with methods that could prove fatal." Reverend Samuel Whitehorse, a progressive minister who'd come west to minister to both white settlers and Native Americans, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Ezekiel, I've seen the girl. She seems gentle, careful, and young Dakota is speaking again. Surely that counts for something." "Coincidence," Dr. Stone replied firmly. "The boy was bound to recover eventually. Trauma-induced mutism often resolves itself with time. But if we allow this girl to continue her activities, we're encouraging people to reject proven medical treatment in favor of superstition." "What do you propose?" asked Mayor Jefferson Banks, a thin man who rarely made decisions without consulting his wife. "A 48-hour ultimatum. She leaves voluntarily, or we petition the territorial marshal to remove her as a public health threat. I have documentation of incidents in other territories where her interventions led to deaths." The vote was close. 3 in favor, 2 opposed. Reverend Whitehorse and the newest council member, a young lawyer named William Hayes, voted against the ultimatum. But the majority ruled. The next morning, Mayor Banks knocked on Hunter Redfeather's door with an official notice. Dakota answered, his face bright with the confidence that had returned over the past week. The brightness faded as he read the fear in the mayor's expression. Hunter appeared behind his son, his hand protective on Dakota's shoulder. "What can I do for you, Jefferson?" "I'm sorry, Hunter. Truly I am." The mayor's voice cracked slightly. "The town council has voted. The girl has 48 hours to leave Copper Mesa voluntarily, or she'll be removed by territorial authorities." Dakota's face went pale. For a moment, Hunter thought his son might retreat back into silence, but instead the boy straightened his shoulders and looked the mayor directly in the eye. "Why?" Dakota asked, his voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "What did she do wrong?" Mayor Banks couldn't meet the child's gaze. "It's complicated, son. Adult matters." "She saved courage," Dakota said simply. "She made me remember how to talk." "If that's wrong, then I don't understand anything anymore." Neither did Hunter, but he pulled his son close and watched the mayor walk away, carrying with him the 48 hours that might destroy everything they'd just begun to rebuild. The 48-hour countdown began like a slow-burning fuse, each tick of the clock echoing through the ranch house with increasing urgency. Sage received the news with the same quiet dignity she'd shown since arriving, but Hunter noticed how her hands trembled slightly as she folded the official notice and placed it on the kitchen table beside Pearl's morning coffee. Dakota's reaction was immediate and devastating. The light that had returned to his eyes flickered like a candle in wind, and for several terrifying minutes Hunter feared his son would retreat completely back into silence. Instead, something fiercer emerged, a 10-year-old's pure sense of justice that wouldn't be quietly dismissed. "They can't make her leave," Dakota declared, his small fists clenched. "She hasn't hurt anyone. She helps animals. She helped me." "Sometimes, son, being right isn't enough," Hunter said gently, though the words tasted like ash in his mouth. He'd learned that lesson when he married Willow. Love didn't always conquer prejudice, and good intentions couldn't always overcome fear. Pearl Meadowlark sat in her rocking chair by the window, her weathered fingers working steadily on a piece of beadwork. She hadn't spoken since the mayor left, but Hunter could see the storm building behind her dark eyes. When Pearl finally broke her silence, her voice carried the weight of 70 years and too much loss. "They fear what they don't understand," she said quietly. "Same fear that drove my people onto reservations, same fear that made them take our children to boarding schools. They think if they can control what's different, they can control their own terror of the unknown. Sage looked up from where she sat beside Dakota on the floor, teaching him to braid sweetgrass into healing bundles. Maybe they're right to be afraid. I've brought trouble everywhere I've gone. People see things they can't explain, and they need someone to blame when life goes wrong. That's not true, Dakota protested. You didn't make bad things happen. You just tried to fix them. The wisdom in his young voice broke Hunter's heart. His son had learned too much about blame and guilt in his short life. Watching his mother swept away by floodwaters while he stood helpless on the bank had taught him that sometimes terrible things happened without reason or fault. Over the next 2 days, the battle lines in Copper Mesa became increasingly clear. The town split into factions with the precision of a cleaver through bone. On one side stood Dr. Stone and his allies, Martha Goldfield, Mayor Banks, and several of the more prosperous business owners who valued order and respectability above all else. They spoke of public safety, proper medical licensing, and the dangers of encouraging primitive superstitions. On the other side gathered an unlikely coalition. Reverend Whitehorse preached on Sunday about Jesus healing the sick and commanding his followers to welcome strangers. Old Thomas Clearwater brought his previously lame horse to town, the animal walking normally for the first time in 2 years, and loudly credited Sage's gentle touch for the improvement. Several Mexican families from the south side of town quietly admitted they'd sought Sage's help with sick livestock and found her both knowledgeable and effective. But it was the women who surprised everyone. Despite Martha Goldfield's campaign to rally them against Sage, many of the ranch wives found themselves drawn to the quiet girl who worked without payment and never boasted about her successes. They remembered their own grandmother's remedies, the herb gardens their mothers had tended, the old ways that had been slowly disappearing under the pressure to modernize and conform. Sarah McKenna, whose husband owned the largest cattle ranch outside town, defied her husband's wishes and brought her daughter's kitten to Sage when it was found nearly dead from a coyote attack. The tiny creature recovered completely, and Sarah quietly spread the word among the women that perhaps there was room for both Dr. Stone's modern medicine and the ancient wisdom Sage carried. The financial pressure on Hunter's family intensified during these crucial days. With only 65 days remaining before the bank foreclosure, he couldn't afford to anger potential buyers or business partners by harboring a controversial figure. Several men who'd expressed interest in purchasing his cattle suddenly became unavailable for meetings. The general store owner, pressured by Martha Goldfield, refused to extend Hunter's credit for essential supplies. "I could leave," Sage offered one evening as they sat around the dinner table, the ultimatum deadline less than 12 hours away. "I never meant to bring trouble to your family." "No," Dakota said immediately. "We don't abandon people we love." The word hung in the air like a benediction. Love. It was the first time Dakota had used that word since his mother's death, and Sage's eyes filled with tears. She quickly blinked away. Hunter studied the girl who'd somehow become central to his son's healing. She was barely 16, alone in the world, carrying burdens no child should bear. In her quiet strength and gentle way with wounded creatures, he saw echoes of Willow, not replacement, but recognition. This was the kind of person his wife would have fought to protect. "We stand together," he decided. "All of us." The confrontation came to a head on market day when half the territory gathered in Copper Mesa for weekly trading. Dr. Stone chose his moment carefully, approaching Hunter's wagon as he prepared to sell the few cattle he could spare. A crowd gathered quickly. Word of conflict spread faster than gossip in a small town. "Hunter," Dr. Stone said, his voice carrying clearly across the dusty street, "I'm giving you one final opportunity to see reason. Send the girl away voluntarily and there'll be no legal consequences. Continue to harbor her, and I'll have no choice but to petition for federal intervention." On what grounds? Hunter asked calmly, though every muscle in his body was tense. Practicing medicine without a license, endangering public health, corrupting a minor child with primitive superstitions. Dr. Stone's voice grew louder, playing to the crowd. I have documented evidence of deaths in other territories that can be traced to her interventions. Sage stepped forward, her chin raised with quiet dignity. What deaths? Dr. Stone's eyes narrowed. Maria Santos in Las Cruces. You treated her grandmother for pneumonia with herbs instead of proper medicine. The woman died 3 days later. She was 87 years old with weak lungs, Sage replied steadily. Her family called me only when they'd given up hope. I eased her pain and helped her die peacefully, surrounded by people who loved her. If that's a crime, then so be it. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This wasn't the defensive response they'd expected. What about Jacob Morrison in Colorado? Dr. Stone pressed. Crushed in a mining accident. You claimed you could heal him, and his family refused to take him to Denver for surgery. He died because they trusted your primitive methods instead of real medicine. For the first time, Sage's composure cracked slightly. Jacob was my friend. The mine shaft had crushed his spine completely. No doctor in Denver or anywhere else could have saved him. I stayed with him for 2 days, managing his pain with willow bark and singing the songs his mother had taught him. He died knowing someone cared enough to sit with him in the darkness. The crowd was utterly silent now. This wasn't the dangerous fraud Dr. Stone had described, but a young woman who'd witnessed more death and suffering than most people twice her age. Dakota suddenly broke free from his father's protective grip and walked to stand beside Sage. She didn't make those people die, he said clearly. Death isn't something you catch from a person, it's something that happens, like storms or floods or animals getting old. Sage doesn't cause it, she just makes it less scary. The wisdom in his words stunned the assembled crowd. Here was a child who'd watched his own mother die, speaking with an understanding that came from real loss rather than theoretical fear. Old Thomas Clearwater stepped forward, leading his previously lame horse. This mare couldn't walk 50 yards without pain 6 months ago. Sage spent 3 hours with her, using nothing but patience and herbs my own grandmother would have recognized. Now look at her. He mounted the horse with an agility that belied his 70 years. If that's fraud, then I'm a fool for feeling grateful. More voices joined in. Sarah McKenna spoke about her daughter's kitten. A Mexican rancher testified about a bull Sage had helped through a difficult recovery from injury. One by one, people who'd quietly sought Sage's help began to speak publicly about their experiences. But Dr. Stone had come too far to retreat now. Emotional testimonials don't change medical facts, he declared. This girl represents everything dangerous about backwards thinking. If we allow her to continue, we're telling our children that superstition is as valuable as education, that feelings matter more than facts. What if they both matter? Reverend Whitehorse stepped into the circle, his voice calm, but carrying clearly. What if healing requires both knowledge and compassion, both science and spirit? Jesus was a healer who touched people with love as much as with power. Jesus was the Son of God, Dr. Stone snapped. This girl is just a confused child playing with forces she doesn't understand. The argument might have continued indefinitely, but Dakota suddenly walked directly to Dr. Stone and looked up at him with eyes far too old for his 10-year-old face. Why are you so scared of her? He asked simply. The question cut through all the medical arguments and legal threats like a knife through gauze. Dr. Stone stared down at the boy, and for a moment his composed professional mask slipped. In that instant, Hunter saw something raw and broken in the doctor's eyes. Grief that had never healed, guilt that had festered into anger. I'm not scared, Dr. Stone said, but his voice lacked conviction. Yes, you are, Dakota replied with the brutal honesty of childhood. You're scared that maybe there are things you don't know how to fix, but being scared doesn't make you bad, and it doesn't make her bad either. It just makes you human." The crowd held its collective breath. Something profound was happening here, though most couldn't name exactly what. A child was offering forgiveness to a man who didn't even know he needed it. "Doctor." Stone stared at Dakota for a long moment, then turned and walked away without another word. The ultimatum deadline passed in silence, and no federal marshal appeared to enforce it. But Hunter knew this wasn't over. Dr. Stone was a proud man backed into a corner, and such men were often more dangerous in retreat than in direct confrontation. The real battle was just beginning. The calm that followed the market day confrontation lasted exactly 72 hours. Then Dr. Stone played his final devastating card. Federal Marshal James Ironcloud arrived on the Thursday morning train, his badge gleaming silver against his dark coat, his face bearing the weathered impassivity of a man who'd seen too much of frontier justice. He was Cherokee himself, which made his presence all the more ominous. The territorial government had clearly chosen their enforcer carefully. Hunter was mucking stalls when Dakota came running from the house, his face pale with terror. "Papa, there's a marshal here with papers. He says they're taking Sage away." The official warrant was thorough and damning, practicing medicine without a license across 3 territories, endangering public welfare, contributing to the deaths of 5 individuals who'd relied on traditional remedies instead of seeking proper medical treatment. The federal charges carried a minimum sentence of 2 years in territorial prison, with possible deportation to Indian Territory in Oklahoma. "I'm sorry," Marshal Ironcloud said quietly as he handed Hunter the documents. His voice carried genuine regret. "I've read the witness statements. Most of the charges seem overstated, but federal law is federal law, and I've got my orders." Sage stood in the ranch house doorway, her hands steady despite the catastrophe unfolding around her. She'd known this moment would come eventually. It always did. In Santa Fe, in Denver, and countless small towns across the territories, the pattern was always the same: brief acceptance, then fear, then rejection enforced by legal authority. "How long do I have?" she asked. 24 hours to settle your affairs," the marshal replied. "Then we ride to Tucson for the territorial hearing." Dakota's reaction was swift and heartbreaking. The boy who'd finally found his voice again used it to scream, a raw, primal sound that seemed to tear from his soul. "No, you can't take her. She didn't do anything wrong." He threw himself at the marshal, his small fists pounding uselessly against the man's legs. Hunter caught his son and held him tight, feeling the boy's whole body shake with rage and terror. "She's family," Dakota sobbed. "She's the only one who understood. If you take her away, I'll never talk again. I swear I won't." The threat wasn't manipulation. It was prophecy. Hunter could see in his son's eyes the same hollow darkness that had consumed him after Willow's death. Losing Sage wouldn't just mean silence. It would mean losing Dakota entirely to a grief too large for his young heart to carry. That evening, an emergency gathering formed spontaneously in the Red Feather barn. Word had spread through the community's informal networks: the women who shared recipes and remedies, the men who helped with difficult births and injured animals, the children who'd watched Sage work her gentle miracles. They came not as an organized protest, but as individuals drawn together by shared injustice. Thomas Clearwater arrived first, leading his now healthy horse. 60 years I've lived in this territory," he declared, his voice crackling with age and fury, "seen claim jumpers and cattle thieves go free while they arrest a girl for being kind to animals." Sarah McKenna came with her recovered kitten and 3 other ranch wives whose animals Sage had helped. The Mexican families from south of town gathered quietly near the barn's entrance, their presence speaking louder than words in a community where their voices were rarely heard. Even some unexpected allies appeared. Young lawyer William Hayes brought a satchel full of legal documents, muttering about federal overreach and the constitutional right to practice traditional healing. Two of Dr. Stone's own patients, elderly men whose arthritis Sage had eased with willow bark tea, stood awkwardly near the door, their loyalty torn between their doctor and their relief. But it was Pearl Meadowlark who delivered the most devastating revelation. The old woman rose slowly from her chair, her joints protesting years of hard work and harder losses. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of 7 decades and the weight of ancient wisdom. "You want to know who this girl really is?" Pearl asked, her eyes finding each face in the crowded barn. "You want to know why she understands animals, why she can ease pain that doctors can't touch?" The barn fell silent, except for the gentle sounds of horses and the distant call of night birds. Her mother was Night Star, a Cherokee medicine woman who could heal both animals and people. I knew her 20 years ago, before the government forced most Cherokee families onto reservations. Night Star married a white doctor, a good man who respected her knowledge and learned from her traditions. Hunter felt his blood turn cold. He was beginning to understand where this story led. They had 2 children, Pearl continued, a daughter who inherited her mother's gifts and a son who chose his father's medicine. When soldiers came to force Cherokee families west, the white doctor had to choose, send his wife and children away or lose his medical practice and social standing. Sage had gone very still, her face pale in the lamplight. She knew this story, but she'd never heard it told by someone who'd been there. "He chose his career," Pearl said simply, "sent Night Star and little Sage away in the middle of winter, kept the boy to raise as white. Night Star died of pneumonia that winter, alone except for her 7-year-old daughter. The girl survived by learning to live with animals when humans had failed her. The implications hit the gathered crowd like a physical blow. Dr. Stone, their respected physician, their moral authority, had abandoned his own wife and daughter to preserve his reputation. The boy he kept? Pearl's voice was barely above a whisper now. That was Jeremiah Stone, the son who died 5 years ago because his father was too proud to combine traditional healing with modern medicine, just like he'd been too proud to keep his Cherokee family. Sage finally spoke, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "I didn't know he was here when I came to Copper Mesa. I just follow the animals, go where I'm needed. I never expected to find—" She couldn't finish the sentence. How could she explain the cruel irony of seeking refuge in the very town where her father had built a new life on the ruins of her childhood? Dakota broke free from his father's arms and ran to Sage, throwing his thin arms around her waist. "He can't take you away. Not when we just found you. Not when you just found your family." The word family seemed to break something inside Sage. She knelt and gathered Dakota close, her control finally cracking. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I never meant to bring this pain to your house. Everywhere I go, people get hurt because of me." "That's not true," Dakota said fiercely. "People get hurt because other people are scared and mean. But you make the hurt smaller. You make it bearable." Marshal Ironcloud had been standing quietly in the barn's entrance, listening to revelations that complicated his simple mission. He was a Cherokee himself, raised on stories of families destroyed by government policies and white medicine's refusal to acknowledge traditional knowledge. This wasn't the clear-cut case his orders had suggested. "The hearing is still required," he said finally, "but I can delay transport for 48 hours if new evidence emerges that affects the charges." It wasn't much, but it was something. William Hayes immediately began scribbling notes about witness testimony and constitutional challenges. The assembled crowd started making plans for a coordinated defense, pooling resources and testimonials. But Hunter knew that legal strategies wouldn't be enough. Dr. Stone had spent 5 years building a case against traditional healing, motivated by guilt over his son's death and his own abandoned family. This wasn't about medical licensing or public safety. It was about a broken man's need to prove that his choices had been right, even if it meant destroying the daughter he'd left to die. As the crowd began to disperse, making quiet promises to return with more support, Hunter found himself alone with Sage and Dakota in the barn's golden lamplight. His son had fallen asleep against Sage's shoulder, exhausted by the day's emotional storms. "I remember her," Sage said quietly, stroking Dakota's hair. "My mother. She used to sing the same songs I sing to the animals. She taught me that healing wasn't about magic or medicine. It was about love, brave enough to touch pain without turning away." Hunter looked at this remarkable girl who'd brought his son back from silence, who'd shown him that love could transcend every boundary society tried to impose. In 48 hours, she might be gone forever, taking with her Dakota's newfound voice and Hunter's unexpected hope for a family rebuilt from broken pieces. "We won't let them take you," he promised, though he had no idea how to keep such a vow. Sage smiled sadly. "Some fights can't be won, Hunter. Sometimes the kindest thing is to disappear before more people get hurt." But as she spoke, Dakota stirred in his sleep and whispered a single word that changed everything. "Sister." The boy had found his family. Now Hunter had to find a way to keep it together, even if it meant standing against the law, the town, and the man whose guilt had twisted love into destruction. The final battle was about to begin. The 48 hours Marshal Ironcloud had granted passed like sand through desperate fingers. Despite the community's rallying support and William Hayes's frantic legal maneuvering, the federal charges against Sage remained ironclad. Dr. Stone had been methodical in building his case, documenting every death that occurred after Sage's involvement, regardless of circumstances. Dawn broke gray and cheerless on the day of reckoning. Sage had spent the night in the barn with the animals, saying goodbye to each creature she'd helped heal. Dakota found her there at sunrise, sitting beside Courage's roost, the recovered rooster perched contentedly on her shoulder. "I won't let you go," he said simply, his 10-year-old voice carrying absolute determination. "Sometimes we don't get to choose, little brother," Sage replied, using the Cherokee word that meant both family member and beloved friend. "Then I'm coming with you." The declaration sent ice through Hunter's veins as he approached the barn. His son stood with a packed satchel, his jaw set with the same stubborn resolve that had once driven Willow to jump into floodwaters to save a trapped horse. "Dakota, no," Hunter said firmly. "You can't." "I can," Dakota interrupted, his voice steady. "If they take her away, I'll just follow. I'll run away and find her, no matter how far they send her. At least if I go now, we'll be together." The logic was heartbreaking and completely sound. Hunter recognized his own desperate determination reflected in his son's eyes, the same drive that had led him to cross social boundaries to marry a Lakota woman, the same fierce protectiveness that had kept him fighting for the ranch even when defeat seemed certain. Dr. Stone arrived with Marshal Ironcloud precisely at the appointed hour. The doctor's face was a mask of professional satisfaction, but Hunter noticed the dark circles under his eyes, the tremor in his hands that spoke of sleepless nights and guilty consciences. "The transport wagon is ready," Dr. Stone announced. "The Territorial Court in Tucson expects the prisoner by Saturday." "Prisoner?" Pearl Meadowlark emerged from the house, her weathered face blazing with fury. "You call your own daughter a prisoner?" Dr. Stone's composure cracked slightly. "That girl is not my daughter. My daughter died with her mother 20 years ago when they chose to leave civilization behind." You sent us away." Sage spoke for the first time that morning, her voice cutting through the dawn air like a blade. "You chose your reputation over your family. You let us walk into winter with nothing because keeping us would have cost you patience." "I gave you a choice," Dr. Stone replied coldly. "Stay and conform to civilized society, or leave with your primitive beliefs." "You chose to leave. I was 7 years old." Sage's control finally shattered, years of suppressed pain pouring out. "I was a child who watched her mother die because the medicine woman who could have saved her was too far away, and the white doctors wouldn't treat squaws even if we'd had money to pay them." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a grass fire. Dr. Stone's face went white, then flushed dark with anger or shame. "Your mother died because she refused proper medical treatment," he said through gritted teeth. "Just like my son died because he trusted native remedies over real medicine. Just like people will keep dying if we let superstition replace science." Dakota stepped forward, his young face blazing with an anger Hunter had never seen before. "You're a liar," he said clearly. "Sage doesn't replace anything. She just helps." "But you don't want help. You want to be the only one who can fix things, even when you can't." Marshal Ironcloud shifted uncomfortably. This family drama was far more complicated than his orders had suggested, and the boy's words carried uncomfortable truth. "That's enough," Dr. Stone snapped. "Marshal, do your duty." Ironcloud approached Sage with obvious reluctance. "I'm sorry, miss. I have to ask you to come with me now." Sage nodded with heartbreaking dignity. "I understand." She turned to Dakota and cupped his face in her hands. "Remember what your mother taught you about speaking to animals. Remember that healing happens when someone cares enough to stay present with pain. Don't let anyone convince you that love is primitive or foolish." Dakota threw his arms around her neck. "I'll find you," he whispered fiercely. "I promise I'll find you." As Marshal Ironcloud gently but firmly led Sage toward the transport wagon, the girl who'd survived abandonment, poverty, and years of wandering alone finally broke. Not from fear of prison, but from the crushing weight of causing more pain to people she'd learned to love. "Please," she said, turning back to Dr. Stone with tears streaming down her face. "Don't punish them for helping me. Whatever anger you have, it's for me. I'm the one who reminds you of choices you regret." Dr. Stone stared at his daughter, because despite his denials, everyone present could see the resemblance now that the truth was revealed. The same dark eyes, the same stubborn chin, the same hands that moved with unconscious grace around injured creatures. "You remind me of failure," he said quietly. "Every life you save is proof that I was wrong to dismiss your mother's knowledge. Every person who trusts you is someone who might die because they chose tradition over science, just like Jeremiah did." The confession revealed the twisted logic that had driven Dr. Stone's crusade. He wasn't protecting people from dangerous superstition. He was protecting himself from evidence that his life's work was incomplete, that his abandonment of family had been not just cruel, but medically wrong. Dakota pulled away from his father and walked directly to Dr. Stone. "Your son didn't die because he trusted the wrong medicine," he said with devastating clarity. "He died because you taught him that he had to choose between his father's way and his heart's way. Sage doesn't make people choose. She just adds more ways to help." The words hit Dr. Stone like physical blows. Hunter watched the older man's face cycle through denial, anger, and something that might have been recognition of truth. "It's too late," Dr. Stone whispered, more to himself than to Dakota. "The charges are filed. The law requires—" "The law serves justice," Marshal Ironcloud interrupted quietly. "And justice requires truth, not just procedure." Everyone turned to stare at the Cherokee lawman, hope flickering in faces that had accepted defeat. "I've been listening to testimony for 2 days," Ironcloud continued. "What I hear is a family destroyed by prejudice, a community divided by fear, and a young woman being punished for the crime of practicing the healing traditions of her people. That's not law. That's persecution." Dr. Stone's face went pale. "You can't simply ignore federal charges. I can recommend dismissal based on prosecutorial misconduct and insufficient evidence," Ironcloud replied calmly, "especially when the primary complainant appears to have personal motives that compromise the integrity of the charges." Sage stared at the marshal as if he'd just offered her the moon. "You would do that?" "I took an oath to uphold justice, not to enforce one man's guilt," Ironcloud said. "Your mother's people are my people too. I won't be the instrument of destroying what little traditional knowledge survives." Dakota whooped with joy and ran to Sage, nearly knocking her over with the force of his embrace. Hunter felt tears of relief sting his eyes as he watched his son's face blaze with happiness. But Dr. Stone wasn't finished. His life's justification was crumbling, and desperate men do desperate things. "If you won't enforce the law," he said, his voice turning dangerous, "then I'll take matters into my own hands." Dr. Stone's threat hung in the morning air like the promise of violence, but before anyone could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention to the ranch road. A rider was coming fast, his horse lathered with sweat and foam, kicking up clouds of red dust in the dawn light. It was Tommy McKenna, Sarah's youngest boy, barely 14 but riding like his life depended on it. He pulled up hard beside the group, his horse dancing nervously as the boy struggled to catch his breath. "Doc Stone," he gasped, "you gotta come quick. It's the Clearwater place. Old Thomas got thrown by that mare of his, the one that was lame. She spooked at a rattler and threw him hard against the fence post. He's in a real bad way, Doc. Ma sent me to fetch you." Dr. Stone's face went through a complex series of emotions, professional duty warring with personal vendetta. "How bad?" he asked curtly. "Unconscious, bleeding from his head. Pa thinks maybe his back's hurt too. He ain't moving his legs none." Tommy's young voice cracked with fear. "Please, Doc. He's been good to our family." Marshal Ironcloud stepped forward. "I'll escort Miss Willowbrook to town for now. Keep her safe while—" "No," Sage interrupted quietly. "I should go with Dr. Stone." Everyone stared at her as if she'd lost her mind. Dakota grabbed her arm protectively. "Sage, no! He'll hurt you." "Thomas helped me when no one else would," she said simply. "And if his back is injured—" She looked directly at Dr. Stone. "You know as well as I do that traditional Cherokee medicine has techniques for spinal injuries that aren't taught in medical schools. Your books won't tell you how to reduce swelling with specific herb combinations or which pressure points can restore feeling to paralyzed limbs." Dr. Stone's jaw worked silently. 30 years of medical practice warred with personal hatred. Professional pride battled against the possibility that his daughter might possess knowledge he lacked. "If I let you come," he said finally, "it's as my assistant following my orders. You don't practice your methods unless I specifically authorize it." Sage nodded. "Agreed. And if he dies despite our efforts, you accept full responsibility for encouraging false hope." "If he dies," Sage replied quietly, "it won't be because we didn't try everything possible." The ride to the Clearwater Ranch was tense and silent. Dr. Stone drove his medical wagon with rigid precision while Sage sat beside him, her healing bag clutched in her lap. Hunter and Dakota followed on horseback, neither willing to let Sage face this trial alone. Marshal Ironcloud brought up the rear, his hand resting casually on his sidearm, not expecting trouble but prepared for it. They found Thomas Clearwater lying motionless in the dust beside his corral, surrounded by his worried neighbors. The old rancher's face was gray, blood matting his white hair where his head had struck the fence post. His breathing was shallow and irregular, and most terrifying of all, his legs lay at unnatural angles that suggested severe spinal damage. Dr. Stone knelt beside his patient and began a systematic examination. "Severe head trauma, possible skull fracture," he muttered, more to himself than to the gathered crowd. "Pupil response is sluggish. Possible concussion or worse." His hands moved to Thomas's neck and spine. "Vertebrae feel intact, but there's significant swelling. No reflexes in the lower extremities." The diagnosis was grim. Even if Thomas survived the head injury, paralysis seemed almost certain. In 1885, spinal injuries were essentially death sentences, if not immediate, then slow and inevitable. "We need to move him to my office," Dr. Stone announced. Carefully, very carefully. "Wait," Sage said quietly. She knelt on Thomas's other side, her hands hovering over his body without touching. "The swelling around his spine, if we move him now, it could shift and cause permanent damage. Let me try something first." Dr. Stone's face flushed with anger. "Absolutely not. This man needs real medical treatment, not your primitive—" "Look at him," Sage interrupted, her voice sharp with desperation. "Look at his color, his breathing. You know as well as I do that he's dying. Your medical treatment can't reverse spinal swelling, can't draw out the pressure that's killing the nerves. What do you have to lose by letting me try?" The brutal honesty of her assessment silenced the gathered crowd. Dr. Stone stared at his patient, his professional training warring with personal prejudice. Thomas Clearwater was indeed dying, and conventional medicine of 1885 offered nothing for severe spinal trauma. "5 minutes, doctor," Stone said finally. "You have 5 minutes to show me something other than theatrical nonsense." Sage immediately opened her healing bag and began removing items that looked primitive to modern eyes but represented generations of refined knowledge. Dried herbs for reducing inflammation, oils for increasing circulation, and small tools for applying precise pressure to specific points along the spine. "This is willow bark extract," she explained as she worked, her voice taking on the cadence of a teacher. "More concentrated than anything you can buy, specifically prepared for neurological inflammation. And this," she held up a thin wooden stick, "is for stimulating the pressure points that correspond to spinal nerve clusters." Dr. Stone watched with growing fascination despite himself. This wasn't the random herb gathering he'd expected, but systematic treatment based on detailed anatomical knowledge. Sage began by gently massaging specific points along Thomas's neck and spine, her fingers finding locations with the precision of someone who'd studied the human body extensively. As she worked, she hummed, not random melodies, but rhythmic patterns that seemed to correspond to breathing and heartbeat. "The humming regulates his autonomic responses," she explained without looking up, "helps prevent shock and maintains blood flow to the brain while the herbs work." Within minutes, Thomas's breathing deepened and his color improved slightly. Dr. Stone checked his pupils and found the response marginally better. When Sage applied pressure to a specific point at the base of the skull, Thomas's right leg twitched involuntarily. "Impossible," Dr. Stone breathed. "Spinal reflexes don't return that quickly." "They do if the damage is from swelling rather than severing," Sage replied, continuing her methodical treatment. "Cherokee healers have been treating these injuries for centuries, and we've learned to distinguish between permanent nerve damage and temporary pressure." She worked for another 10 minutes, applying herbs and gentle manipulation with a knowledge that clearly came from extensive training. Gradually, Thomas's reflexes began returning. First small twitches, then coordinated movement, until finally the old rancher's eyes fluttered open. "Well, I'll be damned," Thomas whispered hoarsely, looking up at the circle of worried faces. "Thought I was done for sure." Dr. Stone performed another examination, his face cycling through amazement, confusion, and something that might have been professional jealousy. Reflexes are returning to normal. Pupil response is good. The head wound is superficial. He looked at Sage with an expression she couldn't read. How? Cherokee medicine recognizes that the body has remarkable healing abilities if you know how to support them, Sage replied simply. Your medical books focus on what's damaged. Our tradition focuses on what's still working and how to strengthen it. Thomas struggled to sit up, waving away offers of help. Doc Stone, I've known you for 15 years and I respect your learning. But this girl just saved my life using methods your fancy medical college probably calls superstition. He looked directly at Dr. Stone. Maybe it's time to admit that healing comes in more forms than what's written in your books. The gathered crowd murmured agreement. They'd just witnessed something that challenged everything they'd been taught about the superiority of modern medicine over traditional knowledge. Dr. Stone stood slowly, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Professional pride warred with undeniable evidence. Personal guilt battled against the possibility of redemption. The daughter he'd abandoned had just demonstrated knowledge that complemented and enhanced everything he'd learned in medical school. The charges, Marshal Ironcloud said quietly. I think we can safely say they're unfounded. Dr. Stone looked at his daughter, and for the first time in 20 years, he saw her clearly. Not as a reminder of failure or a threat to his reputation, but as a skilled healer whose knowledge could save lives he couldn't reach alone. The charges are dropped, he said finally. All of them. But even as relief flooded through the crowd, Dr. Stone's expression remained troubled. Admitting his daughter's value meant confronting 20 years of wrong choices, and some truths cut too deep for simple acknowledgement. The real reckoning was still to come. The weeks that followed Thomas Clearwater's miraculous recovery transformed Copper Mesa in ways no one could have predicted. Word of Sage's healing abilities spread across the territory like wildfire, bringing visitors from as far as New Mexico and Colorado. They came with sick livestock, injured family members, and hope that traditional medicine might succeed where conventional treatment had failed. Hunter found himself managing not just a struggling ranch, but an impromptu healing sanctuary. The barn became a makeshift clinic where Sage treated everything from colicky horses to arthritic grandmothers. Dakota served as her eager assistant, his natural affinity for animals blossoming under her patient guidance. The boy, who'd been mute for 8 months now, chattered constantly, asking questions about herbs and healing techniques with the insatiable curiosity of youth. The financial pressure that had threatened to destroy their family began to ease as grateful patients left modest payments for Sage's services, nothing extravagant, a few dollars here, a sack of grain there, sometimes just a heartfelt thank you note, but enough to make the difference between survival and foreclosure. Hunter paid down his bank debt steadily, and for the first time in months, sleep came without the crushing weight of impending disaster. But the most profound change was in Dr. Stone himself. The respected physician had begun appearing at the ranch with increasing frequency, initially claiming he needed to observe Sage's methods for professional documentation. He brought his medical bag and notepad, recording her techniques with the methodical precision of a scientist studying a new phenomenon. What started as skeptical observation gradually evolved into something approaching collaboration. The willow bark preparation you use, Doctor, Stone said one afternoon as they worked together treating a rancher's injured horse. The concentration is much higher than what I can achieve with standard extraction methods. Sage looked up from where she was applying a poultice to the horse's swollen leg. My grandmother taught me to gather the bark during the new moon, when the sap runs differently. Then it's dried in specific conditions and ground with particular stones that have been used for generations. The process takes weeks. And the pressure point technique for neurological injuries? Based on understanding the body's energy pathways, Sage explained patiently. Cherokee healers have mapped connections between distant parts of the body that your anatomy books don't recognize. We've learned that touching one place can affect healing in another. Dr. Stone scribbled notes furiously, his professional pride warring with undeniable results. It contradicts everything I learned about physiology. Maybe it expands it, Dakota suggested from where he was mixing herbs under Sage's guidance. The 10-year-old had become remarkably insightful about the tension between his sister and the man who was reluctantly acknowledging her as his daughter. The breakthrough came on a rainy Thursday in late October. Marshal Ironcloud arrived with troubling news. A mining accident in the mountains had trapped several men underground. The local doctor in the mining camp had sent desperate word requesting any available medical assistance. Multiple injuries, possible cave-in victims, Ironcloud explained. The camp doctor is overwhelmed. Lives are at stake. Dr. Stone immediately began packing his medical supplies. "I'll leave within the hour. Take me with you," Sage said quietly. Dr. Stone paused in his preparations. "The conditions will be dangerous." Cave-in victims often have crushing injuries that require surgical intervention, and they might have spinal damage, internal bleeding, or trauma that responds better to traditional treatment, Sage countered. "You've seen what happens when we work together. Thomas Clearwater would be dead if you'd relied only on conventional medicine." The truth of her words was undeniable. Over the past month, their combined efforts had achieved results neither could have managed alone. Dr. Stone's diagnostic skills and surgical training complemented Sage's knowledge of herbs and energy healing. Patients recovered faster, suffered fewer complications, and experienced less pain when both approaches were used. "The mining camp is rough territory," Dr. Stone warned. "Men who've never seen a female healer, let alone a Cherokee one." "I've faced worse," Sage replied simply. "And people in pain don't usually care about the healer's race when their lives are at stake." Dakota stepped forward with the determined expression that had become familiar to anyone who tried to argue with him. "I'm going too." "Absolutely not," Hunter said immediately. "It's too dangerous." "Sage might need someone to help with the animals," Dakota insisted. "And someone who can translate if the miners speak languages she doesn't know. Besides," he added with devastating logic, "we're family now. Families stick together when times get hard." The word family hung in the air with particular weight. Dr. Stone had been avoiding that relationship, accepting Sage's medical knowledge while carefully maintaining emotional distance. But Dakota's simple declaration forced the issue into the open. Hunter looked at his son's determined face and recognized the futility of argument. Dakota had inherited his mother's stubborn compassion. Once he decided someone needed help, no force on earth could deter him. "We all go," Hunter decided. "If this family is going to face danger, we face it together." The journey to the mining camp took 2 days through treacherous mountain trails. Dr. Stone and Sage rode together in the medical wagon, their conversation gradually shifting from professional consultation to something approaching personal reconciliation. Dakota and Hunter followed on horseback, the boy chattering endlessly about everything he was learning from his adopted sister. "Why did you really leave us?" Sage asked on the second evening as they made camp beside a mountain stream. Dr. Stone was quiet for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried 20 years of accumulated guilt and regret. "Fear," he admitted. "Pure, selfish fear. When I married your mother, I thought love was enough to overcome prejudice." But patients started refusing treatment from a doctor with an Indian wife. Other physicians questioned my judgment. The medical board suggested my license might be reviewed. He stared into the campfire, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "I convinced myself I was protecting my ability to help people. If I lost my practice, I reasoned, Who would treat the injuries and illnesses that required surgical skill? But the truth was simpler and uglier. I was protecting my reputation, my income, my comfortable life. Sage listened without judgment, her face reflecting firelight and something that might have been forgiveness. When Jeremiah died, Dr. Stone continued, I told myself it proved I'd been right to choose scientific medicine over traditional healing. But deep down, I knew the real truth. He died because I'd taught him that he couldn't trust both approaches. I made him choose between his father's way and his heart's way, just like I'd chosen between my career and my family. Dakota looked up from where he was sketching horses in his journal. You can still choose differently now. The simple wisdom in the boy's words seemed to break something inside Dr. Stone. For the first time since Sage had arrived in Copper Mesa, he looked directly at his daughter with eyes unclouded by guilt or professional pride. I don't know how to be a father to you, he said quietly. I abandoned that right 20 years ago. You don't have to be my father, Sage replied gently. But you could be my colleague, my partner in healing, someone who understands that medicine works best when it combines knowledge with compassion. The mining camp was a chaos of pain and desperation when they arrived. 15 men had been trapped when a support beam collapsed, and the local doctor, a whiskey-soaked frontier physician whose hands shook too badly for precise work, was overwhelmed by the scope of the injuries. What followed was 36 hours of the most challenging medical work any of them had ever attempted. Dr. Stone performed emergency surgery to stop internal bleeding while Sage used traditional techniques to treat shock and trauma. Dakota assisted both of them, his small hands perfect for reaching into tight spaces to apply bandages or deliver instruments. They worked as a team in ways that transcended their complicated family history. When conventional surgery couldn't address nerve damage, Cherokee pressure point techniques restored feeling to crushed limbs. When traditional herbs alone weren't enough to prevent infection, modern antiseptics saved lives. Each approach enhanced the other, creating results that neither could have achieved alone. By the time the last injured miner was stabilized, something fundamental had shifted between Dr. Stone and his daughter. They'd saved lives together, shared the exhaustion and triumph that comes from pulling people back from death's threshold. Professional respect had evolved into something deeper, mutual recognition of shared purpose and complementary gifts. I have a proposal, Dr. Stone said as they prepared for the journey home. Copper Mesa needs a real medical clinic, something more substantial than my small office or your barn treatments. What if we built something together, a place where both traditional and modern healing could be practiced side by side? Sage stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. You would do that? Risk your reputation by officially acknowledging Cherokee medicine? I'm 55 years old, Dr. Stone replied. I've spent my entire career protecting a reputation built on abandoning the people I should have loved most. It's time I started building something worth leaving behind. Dakota whooped with joy and threw his arms around both adults. We really are going to be a family. Hunter watched the three of them embrace and felt something settle into place in his chest, a sense of completion he hadn't experienced since Willow's death. They were an unlikely family, bound together by loss and healing, but they were family nonetheless. The ride back to Copper Mesa was filled with planning and possibility. They talked about the clinic they would build, the training programs they might establish, the bridge they could create between two worlds of healing knowledge. For the first time in 20 years, Dr. Stone spoke about the future with hope instead of regret. And for the first time since arriving in Copper Mesa, Sage allowed herself to believe that she might finally have found a place where she truly belonged. The new medical clinic rose from the red earth of Copper Mesa like a testament to second chances and the healing power of family bonds that transcend blood. built with funds raised by the grateful community and designed to accommodate both modern medical equipment and traditional healing spaces. It stood as something unprecedented in the Arizona Territory, a place where Cherokee wisdom and Harvard-trained medicine worked hand in hand. 6 months after the mining camp rescue, the Red Featherstone Medical Center officially opened its doors on a bright spring morning in 1886. The name itself told the story of an unlikely family forged from loss, redemption, and the courage to bridge two worlds that had been kept artificially separate for too long. Dr. Ezekiel Stone stood in the main examination room, adjusting his instruments with the nervous energy of a man embarking on the most important work of his career. At 55, he discovered that true medical practice meant more than diagnosing symptoms and prescribing treatments. It meant understanding that healing happened when science and compassion joined forces to address not just physical ailments, but the deeper wounds that lived in hearts and spirits. Sage moved through the adjacent traditional healing room with quiet confidence, arranging her herbs and preparing the sacred space where Cherokee techniques would be practiced openly for the first time in territorial history. At 17 now, she'd grown into her role as both healer and teacher, her natural wisdom deepened by months of learning from her father's medical knowledge while sharing her own ancestral practices. Dakota, 11 years old and bursting with energy, served as the clinic's unofficial ambassador and junior assistant. The boy who'd been silent for 8 months now talked enough for 3 people, greeting patients with infectious enthusiasm and demonstrating an uncanny ability to calm nervous animals and frighten children alike. His dream of becoming the territory's first Native American veterinarian seemed more achievable every day. Hunter watched his expanded family with deep satisfaction as he finished hanging the clinic's sign. The ranch still operated more successfully than ever, thanks to their reputation for healing both livestock and the people who cared for them. But this clinic represented something larger. It was proof that love could indeed conquer prejudice, that families could be rebuilt from broken pieces, and that sometimes the greatest healing came from accepting help from unexpected sources. Pearl Meadowlark, now 71, had taken up residence in a small cabin behind the clinic. Her role as the keeper of traditional stories and the bridge between Cherokee wisdom and modern application had made her invaluable to their growing practice. Patients often found themselves staying longer than necessary just to hear her gentle voice sharing the old knowledge that connected healing plants to the cycles of moon and season. The opening day brought a steady stream of visitors, ranchers with injured livestock, families seeking treatment for ailments that conventional medicine hadn't been able to address, and curious townspeople who wanted to see this unprecedented collaboration for themselves. Most gratifying were the delegations from other towns and territories, including several traditional healers who'd traveled hundreds of miles to witness what many had thought impossible: native medicine being practiced openly and respectfully alongside conventional treatment. "Mrs. Goldfield to see you," Dakota announced cheerfully, ushering the banker's wife into Dr. Stone's examination room. Martha Goldfield, who'd once led the campaign to drive Sage away, now stood hat in hand, her usual imperious manner replaced by genuine humility. "Doctor," she began hesitantly, "I owe you, all of you, an apology. My arthritis has been getting worse, and nothing you've prescribed has helped much. I was wondering if Miss Sage might have something that could ease the pain." Dr. Stone smiled gently. "Let's have Sage examine you, and then we'll work together to develop a treatment plan that combines both approaches. You might be surprised how well they complement each other." As Martha was led to the traditional healing room, Dr. Stone reflected on how many similar conversations had taken place over the past months. People who'd once viewed Cherokee medicine with suspicion now sought it out when conventional treatments fell short. The clinic had demonstrated something powerful. Healing wasn't about choosing between old ways and new ways, but about finding the wisdom to use whatever worked best for each individual patient. The afternoon brought their most challenging case yet. A young mother named Elena Rodriguez, whose infant son had been born with severe breathing difficulties. The baby, little Miguel, was failing despite everything conventional medicine could offer. Elena had ridden 3 days from New Mexico carrying her dying child, and a desperate hope that the legendary healers of Copper Mesa might succeed where others had failed. Dr. Stone's examination confirmed the severity of the situation. "The child's lungs are severely underdeveloped," he told Elena gently. "I can provide supportive care, but I don't have any treatment that will address the underlying condition." Sage knelt beside Elena, her hands gentle as she examined the tiny baby. "In Cherokee tradition, we believe that some children choose difficult births because their spirits need extra help connecting to this world. There are techniques for strengthening the life force in newborns, but they require complete trust and several days of intensive treatment." Elena looked between the two healers, seeing not conflict but cooperation. "Please," she whispered, "try everything." What followed was a remarkable demonstration of medical collaboration. Dr. Stone provided oxygen support and monitored the baby's vital signs, while Sage used traditional techniques to strengthen Miguel's breathing reflexes and energy systems. Dakota assisted both, his natural empathy with suffering creatures making him invaluable in keeping the baby calm during treatments. For 3 days and nights, they worked in shifts, never leaving Miguel alone. Sage sang the ancient songs that Cherokee mothers used to call reluctant spirits into healthy bodies. Dr. Stone administered carefully calibrated medications to support lung function. Pearl prepared special teas to strengthen Elena's milk and help her maintain the energy needed to nurse a struggling baby. On the 4th morning, Miguel's breathing suddenly deepened and strengthened. His color improved from dusky blue to healthy pink, and for the first time since his birth, he cried with the lusty vigor of a baby determined to live. "It's a miracle," Elena sobbed, holding her son close. "It's medicine," Dr. Stone corrected gently. "Both kinds working together the way they should." As word of baby Miguel's recovery spread, the clinic's reputation grew beyond anything they'd imagined. Patients arrived from across the southwestern territories, bringing cases that had stumped other physicians and traditional healers working alone. The collaboration between Cherokee medicine and conventional treatment was producing results that neither approach could achieve independently. But perhaps the most meaningful healing was happening within the Stone family itself. Dr. Stone and Sage had developed a working relationship that gradually evolved into genuine father-daughter affection. They still approached problems differently, he with scientific analysis, she with intuitive understanding. But those differences had become strengths rather than sources of conflict. "I've been thinking about medical school," Sage mentioned one evening as they worked together preparing herbal remedies. "Not to replace what I know, but to add to it. There might be others like us who want to bridge both worlds." Dr. Stone looked up from his notes, pride evident in his eyes. "Harvard Medical College now accepts exceptional students regardless of background. With your demonstrated knowledge and my recommendation, you'd do that?" "I'd be honored to do that." "The medical world needs healers who understand that science and spirit aren't opposites, they're partners." Dakota burst into the conversation with his usual enthusiasm. "And I could go to veterinary college. By the time I'm ready, maybe they'll accept students who learn from both kinds of medicine too." Hunter laughed from where he sat reading patient files. "At this rate, you'll revolutionize animal medicine the same way your sister is changing human healing." As the first year of the clinic's operation drew to a close, the Red Feather Stone family gathered for Thanksgiving dinner in their expanded ranch house. The table included not just the core family, but also Marshall Ironcloud, Reverend Whitehorse, Thomas Clearwater, and Elena Rodriguez with baby Miguel, now a healthy, thriving 6-month-old whose miraculous recovery had become legendary across the territories. Dakota stood to offer the blessing, his young voice carrying the wisdom of someone who'd experienced profound loss and equally profound healing. "We're thankful for the gift of second chances," he began, "for families that form from love instead of just blood, for healing that comes in many forms, and for learning that the best medicine happens when we stop trying to choose between helping and loving and start doing both at the same time." As heads nodded around the table, Dr. Stone found himself remembering another Thanksgiving 21 years earlier, the last one he'd shared with his Cherokee wife and young daughter before fear and prejudice drove them away. The man who'd made that choice seemed like a stranger now, someone whose priorities had been so distorted that he'd thrown away everything that mattered for the sake of social acceptance. But perhaps, he reflected, that loss had been necessary to lead them all to this moment. Without the years of separation and pain, he might never have learned the true meaning of healing. Sage might never have developed the strength and wisdom that made her such a remarkable healer. Dakota might never have found the family that helped him recover from his own devastating loss. Sometimes, Dr. Stone realized, the greatest healing came not from preventing wounds, but from learning how to transform them into sources of strength and compassion. As the evening wound down and the extended family began to disperse, Dakota approached Dr. Stone with unusual seriousness. "Grandfather," he said, the Cherokee word he'd begun using for the man who'd become his adoptive family's patriarch, "do you think Mama would be proud of what we've built here?" Dr. Stone looked down at the boy who'd lost his mother to floodwaters but found healing through love and acceptance. "I think your mother would be amazed by the family that grew from all our broken pieces," he said quietly. "And I think she'd be especially proud of you for teaching all of us that families aren't just made, they're chosen every day through acts of love and forgiveness." Dakota smiled and hugged the man who'd learned that it was never too late to choose family over fear, love over prejudice, and healing over pride. Outside, the Arizona stars shone down on a little clinic where two worlds of medicine had learned to dance together, and a family that proved love truly could heal any wound if you were brave enough to let it. Sometimes the most powerful healing happens not when we avoid pain, but when we learn that love is stronger than any wound. For those of us who've lived long enough to accumulate both losses and wisdom, this story reminds us that it's never too late for second chances, never too old to form new families, and never too proud to admit that the best medicine often comes from combining different kinds of knowledge with generous hearts. In a world that often feels divided, we need more stories that show how bridges can be built between different traditions, different generations, and different ways of understanding what it means to heal and be healed. Have you ever experienced healing that came from an unexpected source? What family bonds in your life have been strengthened by working through difficult times together?